The call of the white wolf is loudest at the door.
It's usually quiet around my apartments, but for some reason everybody decided to take their car out for a night drive tonight. So I apologize for any interruptions. I only got 4 hours of sleep. Can't be bothered to shave this week. I don't think this camera is even straight. My chair is extra squeaky. I need to get a new one. So yeah, the day's going great. So I finally watched the first season of The Witcher on Netflix, and it was bad. But at least it was entertaining, right? Kind of. Not all the time. Not really. My emotions this season ranged from meh to really to this is terrible to I don't want to watch no more. After the second episode, I knew that this show wasn't going to offer me anything new or exciting. And a lot of the time, I was actually pretty bored. Fuck off. I don't really know how to start this review, just like all my other reviews. So I'll start off with the good, or at least the things that I liked. Also, spoilers.
Geralt of Rivia.
I dislike that he falls in love with all these women pretty easily. I don't buy for a second that he falls for Renfrey or for Yennefer that easily. It's suggested that magic is involved somehow, but I don't buy it. I think he's just whipped. We actually find out later on in the series that he actually has mommy issues. I liked Henry Cavill's portrayal of Geralt and his characterization. Fuck. Even if I think he didn't really add anything new. I also like that they made him kind of like a walking paradox of sorts, where he doesn't give any fucks and he gives all the fucks all at the same time, even if it's done a little bit inconsistently. I also found him surprisingly relatable. You know, no matter how badass he seems or how long he lives, he seems just as lost as, you know, a lot of us might feel. And he doesn't really know what he wants out of life. I really like the actress that portrayed Yennefer. They made her out to be a really strong, independent character. And out of all the characters, she probably has the most effective character arc.
When a humble bard.
Toss a coin to your Witcher is actually pretty enjoyable. As well as a lot of the soundtrack and score.
They kicked in my teeth.
The fight between Geralt and Renfrey and her goons is actually pretty good. Even if I think it has a lot of annoying elements such as speed ramping and excessive editing. All other fights in the season are pretty disappointing though. And that's about all I liked, I think. As for what I disliked... I don't outright hate this character. It's more like mixed feelings. He's the comic relief character of the series. Everybody likes a comic relief character, but he's just another version of a character we've seen in other things. The flamboyant, witty, over-the-top, skirt-chasing jokester. The most non-essential, essential character in the entire season. This character gets very little characterization, and by the end of the season I felt like she was just like a MacGuffin with legs that Geralt had to chase after. And I think I might actually hate her. Nothing against the actress. I think she did a fine job, you know. I think it's just the writer's fault. Her scenes are either very short, very boring, or pointless. The worst is when it's all three at the same time. The entire time she was in Broccoli Forest or whatever, was pointless and a waste of time. For the most part, I think the writing is too direct and obvious. It's so on the nose that I actually felt like my nose itched sometimes, like if somebody was like digging their nail into the tip of my nose. It leaves nothing to interpretation. Characters always say what they mean. Little to no subtext at all. I can see why they did it, you know, because they're adapting a book that is, from what I hear, actually pretty good. Great even. In books, you can have all this prose and internal dialogue and all this and that. But in my opinion, it's still no excuse to have bad writing, you know. If anything, it makes the books look bad. Actually, if anything, by the time me and other people get around to reading the books, we'll actually be able to compare how bad of a job they did adapting the book into a television program, which means that if anything, the books are going to make the show look bad, which in turn is going to make the books look better. Anyway, enough tangents. Not only is it confusing and jarring when you figure out that it's happening, but it also disrupts the flow of the story and contributed greatly to my lack of enjoyment for the season. We spend time with characters that we already know are going to die, or in the case of Nilfgaard, with an enemy that we already know is pretty dangerous and brutal, instead of building up to that danger. And so we're just stuck waiting for things we've already seen happen to happen again, and it's kind of annoying. I think if they had kept it straight, the season could have been, if not good, at the very least coherent. This show is actually pretty technically deficient, and I think one of the worst aspects is actually the editing. The show struggles to keep its pacing consistent, and it also rushes through the best parts of the series, and it slows down during the worst parts of the series, during the most boring parts. It's also kind of choppy at times, and it does these weird jump cutting techniques that don't add anything and distracted me. They cut when they shouldn't and don't when they I noticed that several times a scene would be interrupted by like a 1 minute shoehorned in scene featuring another character, and then it would jump back to the other scene when it was obviously meant to be continuous. I think this stems from the showrunners thinking that they have some sort of obligation to have all three main characters in every single episode, when it would be better if they concentrate on one or two at a time. It actually became apparent during the 5th episode, which is where Yennefer and Geralt meet for the first time and their storylines converge, and Cirilla doesn't really come into the episode until a little bit at the beginning, and then another short scene at the end. And I actually thought it was one of the more enjoyable and coherent episodes because of it. I think this is probably the most boring of all the episodes. Geralt attends a courting ceremony in Sintra, whereas the first time he meets Calanthe, he's made to go by Jaskier, who pretty much obligates him to go so that Geralt can act as his bodyguard. Like I said, this is where Calanthe and Geralt meet for the first time. She's barely returning from battle and is bathed in the blood of her enemies, which I think would have been a more interesting introduction to her character, rather than what it was in the first episode where she dies. Her daughter Pavetta has to find a suitable suitor to marry, and she's obviously not thrilled at the idea. But then a hedgehog comes in and interrupts, claiming the law of surprise for Pavetta's hand. Things happen. Calanthe tries to kill Sonic, and then Pavetta goes all Super Saiyan, and they spin around the air for an absurdly long time. This is one of those instances where I wish they would have rushed through the scene, because it was so boring just watching them float up there. And when it's over, everyone just kind of like awkwardly stands around and awkwardly lectures Calanthe about the law of surprise and honoring promises and destiny and this and that. But Geralt foolishly calls the law of surprise, even after all the mess that just happened, when the hedgehog offers compensation for Geralt saving his life, and then Pavetta vomits with comedic timing, and then Geralt just goes like, "Fuck." In my opinion, I think this is the worst episode of the entire season. The bar wasn't set all that high with the first episode, but this episode really bothered me. It is the least competent out of all of them. Take all the elements I already didn't like from the show: bad on-the-nose writing, bad pacing and editing, bland characters, and amplify them by a factor of at least 2, and you get this episode. Plus, bad blocking, directing, and cinematography, which are things that I hadn't even thought about till this point, because for the most part it was just serviceable, so I didn't really bother to really criticize all of that. The knight is obviously going to die. The Reavers, or whatever they're called, are obviously the bad guys. The old man is obviously the gold dragon. When Borscht falls to his death, I didn't really feel anything because he was kind of like a bland character, and it was pretty obvious that he was going to come back in a little bit. And Geralt seems devastated for some reason, even though all he did was spend a couple of hours with him, and they didn't really connect or anything, in my opinion. This is probably the most subjective of my opinions, but I think that taking a mostly black and white approach to morality was actually for the detriment of the show. It does try to explore some of the gray areas with the whole cliched men are the real monsters, and in particular during the first episode with Renfri and Calanthe, who are strong, charismatic leaders, but they have committed their fair share of atrocities. I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it fully commits to it. Characters are mean for no reason, and the ones that are evil and ignorant are obviously evil and ignorant, and they deserve to die, and they do like a minute later. The part that is really bothering me in was at the end of the 7th episode, when the guys who used to know Ciri threatened to turn her into Nilfgaard for money, but then she goes all sicko mode and impales them to trees. What bothered me was that the show played up their meanness and physical abuse towards Ciri, when in reality these kids have probably suffered more than Cirilla has, and maybe they even still actually like her, but they see turning her in as pretty much the only way to escape this new reality, whether it was actually Calanthe's fault or not. And then I would have actually, felt some conflicting emotions when I saw them as tree ornaments in the next episode. Or what if, Destiny really is siding with Nilfgaard, and so now our protagonists and their allies are the ones who are fighting against Destiny. But nah, they're just crazy religious nuts.
Oh, you touch my tra-la-la.
Not only does that shit look like low quality plastic, but every time I saw it, it made me think of scrotum, and I don't like that.
My ding ding dong.
Those were my most major complaints. Not all of them, obviously. Otherwise, this video would have been like 3 hours long. But I'm not here to nitpick. In summary, I think this show has a lot of problems, and a lot of people liked it, loved it even, but I just don't see it. It just doesn't feel like the epic adventure it wants to be. If anything, it felt kind of cheap at every step of the way. And it's not that this isn't my cup of tea or anything like that. I love high fantasy and medieval type stuff like this, and I can overlook, budget constraints and small flaws and stuff like that. But like I said, I felt it was so technically deficient that it actually distracted me and I couldn't immerse myself. If I had to put my feelings down into number format, I'm guessing it would be something like 3.78983345, but I'll just round it up to a 4. Not so bad that I think it's awful, but bad enough to where I don't really want to give the second season a chance. And to immediately contradict myself, I think I'll watch at least the first episode of the second season. Maybe I'll even go up to the second episode out of professionalism. I feel like even if they can do better the next season, it's only going to be marginally so. Since it's so successful and everybody likes it, I think the creators will have very little motivation to actually change anything from the formula they've currently chosen, which is kind of disappointing. But hopefully at least now they'll drop the whole alternating timelines thing that I found so annoying. And actually, as I was finishing writing this review, the soundtrack for the show actually just dropped, so I'm actually gonna go ahead and give my opinion on it as well. I don't actually know that much about scores and soundtracks or music for that matter, but I did enjoy the soundtrack. If you're the type of person who's into soundtracks and medieval type music, then you'll definitely love this one. I listened to it mainly as background music, but it still has some bangers that'll make you want to work out, or at the very least make you feel like a badass next time you go grocery shopping or whatever. It does get a little bit samey since it's like 50 plus tracks, but that's kind of by design. You need to have like a recognizable sound or a motif in order to have like a coherent sound, and even have different iterations of the same song. And I give this soundtrack a 7 out of 10. It's definitely better than the thing it's attached to, that's for sure. Like I said, I don't really listen to soundtracks on their own that often, so I don't really know how this compares to other soundtracks, but it definitely felt appropriate and it stood out somehow. We'll just have to see it, like how it ages as it gets used more and more throughout the series. Anyway, thanks for watching. No one? If you agree with me, go ahead, like and subscribe. If you disagree with me, dislike and subscribe, I guess. Peace.